Fragments of Silicon, now also available in a plastic shell shaped like something nostalgic.
Welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon. I'm your host, Adam. Joining me, as always, is the regular crew. I suppose we should start by, we do have a couple of announcements here. Mac is officially on hiatus, which isn't a big surprise. But, he formally mentioned it just before the show started. No idea when he's coming back, but he does plan to come back at some point. He suggested we move the show back to 9. That's not really going to happen, at least not for this season, mainly because when we've got things lined up for at least a couple months. Like, the earliest convenience would be December.
Mm-hmm.
By then, we'd be too far into the season to change tracks.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm going to do there'll be a break. So, also, Kevin is still dealing with the after effects of the hurricane.
Yeah, he's alive, and his house is still a thing.
Yeah.
But
it's just,
there's no power.
Yeah. Or rather, they're on generator power. He's staying with his brother for at least a week. So he said hopefully he'll be back with us in about 2 weeks, which is probably longer than he wanted, but, natural disasters. So, with that in mind, onward to the regular news. Twilight, why don't you start us off here?
All right. Well, as I said last week, I'm looking to finding a apartment for this winter season, and I think we might have at least found a place at the moment, but we haven't looked into it just yet. Not much else going on around here. Work has been good. We've had some rain, and besides that, I've been playing the games for this week, and that'll be about it.
All right. Petty?
Well, those who were around yesterday, I streamed a lot of Final Fantasy XIV. We made it through the main story. We did the normal mode of the new Primal. And we also made ourselves look like idiots. Because we missed something very obvious in the normal mode 011. And yeah, so we're going to be hopefully finishing normal mode of Omega tomorrow. And then on to Savage. Yay.
So presumably the 12th level of this is going to be like literal actual Omega the Spider.
We're fighting him on the 11th. We don't know what the 12th floor is.
Huh.
Because they didn't even show it in the trailer, so people know. It's just we like to try and go in somewhat blind, at least for the first few attempts. See if our brain meats are smart enough to figure this crap out.
Have you fought Shinryu yet?
Oh yeah, he was a normal primal fight.
Just wondering, because they're sometimes together.
Yep. We even fought Midgardstormer. That was fun. Anyway, as far as personal news, A friend of the family passed away last night, so that kind of sucked. Like my mom's more broken about than I am because she like moved away 8 years ago and hasn't made any attempt to contact me. So it's like,
Oh.
you know, she's been in contact with my mom and stuff, but it's like, you know, kind of hard to be broken about somebody you haven't spoken with in 8 years.
Mm.
And aside from that, I have a whole bunch of doctor's appointments coming up, which that's fun. I'm going to be seeing a different doctor about my knee to hopefully get it taken care of.
Is it just your knee, or is it other things as well?
The more recent one is just my knee, but I am going to be, when I can get the number for him, talk to someone, see about seeing somebody in the urology department about my kidney stone that I haven't passed yet.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Yes, it still hurts. I wish it would leave. And aside from that, I think we're good.
Okay. Golix, your turn.
Well, the Nintendo Switch paid online thing started, and I signed up for it. It took a little while because there were some updates to go with it, but it seems to be working about as well as before. The NES games that are available play pretty well. I'm still bad at the first Zelda.
Apparently, don't use the CRT filter because it's causing some ghosting.
Oh.
I think I might have accidentally noticed that, but I never turned it on purpose. Is it on by default?
I don't know.
Well, and apparently people are also mad that you can't remap the controls.
Yeah, that was one thing that I kind of wished you could do, but yeah.
It's like, yeah. I realize it's probably because the NES-style controllers are coming out and they only have 2 buttons.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still kind of crap.
Yeah, because on the 4 buttons, the A and B buttons are not the easiest to press together. Anyway, I was messing around with that. It was pretty good. I'm having a hard time choosing a team for the Splatfest this weekend because it's retro versus modern, and I like both things. But I guess I'll pick that, and I might not have that much time to do it anyway because there's a pre-release for the card game I do this weekend too. So,
I'd have my to do card games.
Oh, I probably don't really, but yeah.
Fair enough.
I'm trying to cut back, but it's still a pre-release, so.
I mean, there's an addiction joke to be made here.
Yeah, there is.
I am fully aware of that. Anyway, I don't got that much going on. Work's going well. The weather is still being extremely humid, but, you know, could be a lot worse. So, next, I guess.
Yeah, well, my turn then. Let's see. There was a bit of concern with some extended family members who were in South Carolina because of the hurricane. But everyone's fine. It's just some people got trapped because rain, water, flooding.
Yeah, flooding not good.
Mm-hmm.
Nope.
But things are fine. Everyone's fine. It's like, so good news there. Let's see. Not much in the way of personal news this week, which is fine. Let's see. Yeah, I just don't have a lot this week. So, merrily we shall roll along to the interview portion of the broadcast. And joining us this week is Damon Slye of Mad Otter Games.
Hi.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
We seem to be doing fine.
Yeah, it sounds like.
Right. So we like to start things by getting to know the person behind the games and all that. And we like to start by asking, what got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
I started in 1978, if you can believe it, and it was on a Commodore PET at our high school, and that only had 8,000 bytes on it, which is not very many bytes. And it was really the ability to write code and then see what you did and interact with it. So I just thought that was pretty cool. I mean, there weren't really very many other games to play at that time. It was maybe even a little before the Apple II had really taken off. So I just liked programming and letting my friends play the games I wrote, and kind of the general challenge of being able to write a game. Starting with really simple games like guessing games, but then getting more complicated to see if you can solve the next problem.
Did you play like Colossal Cave Adventure of any of those ilk?
I'm not sure which one that was. Was that? That sounds familiar. Was that an adventure? That was an adventure game?
Yeah, that was one of the interactive fiction games.
Okay. Did it start like as like on a mainframe or something? I know some of those. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't play that. I think the first type of game like that got me interested was a game called Temple of Apshai. It was for the Apple II, and it had like really rudimentary graphics. And it looked like it was going to be really amazing, this amazing mystery. You go from room to room, and then it was weird. You'd open the manual, which was a book, and it would tell you what, the game would tell you what page to go to, and then you'd read text that would tell you what you're seeing, which it just sounds crazy today, but people didn't know how to make games, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I got to the final room, and there was really nothing there, and I realized that in a game you can sort of have all this hype, but in the end, I don't know. I've just played a lot of games where I've had what I call a Temple of Apshai moment, where I get to the very end and it's like, there was all this promise and this mystery, but you get to the very end and there's nothing there,
Like, well, yeah, that does kind of summate early RPGs. Like there wasn't much to Ultima or Might and Magic compared to what came later.
Yeah, it's almost like it's just like movies. Some movies you're really into it at the beginning. You think this is going to be amazing, and then you get to the end and there's no payoff. You're like, that was just dumb. I shouldn't slam Temple of Apshai because in a lot of ways it was pretty amazing, but it's like you really want there to be something there in a game, I think.
Admittedly, Temple of Apshai was a bit before my time.
Yeah, it was really rudimentary. You'd be surprised, but at the time it was it was kind of a big deal.
Right. It is.
Back then, a big deal was it sells 40,000 copies or something.
Right. And I don't know what kind of games did you personally make on the Commodore PET?
I did a lot of 3D stuff, wireframe 3D stuff. For some reason, early on, I got interested in doing 3D graphics, and so I did a game called Stellar 7, which was kind of similar to the arcade game Battlezone, but it had a lot more depth, because it wasn't a quarter-eating game. It was a sit down and play for an hour kind of game.
Right.
Still had a lot of arcade elements, so that was kind of where I got started on the Commodore PET early on. But then later on at Dynamics, we did all kinds of games, probably like, I don't know, 30 or 40 or 50 games. Maybe I'm exaggerating there, but I can't keep track of the total number we did.
I do remember Dynamics doing a lot of games. But on Stellar 7, that originally released for the Apple II and the C64, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, that's right. I coded it for both of them actually, and they had somebody help me and do the sounds for the Commodore 64. So that's correct, yeah. And that's the only platforms that we supported back then, or I supported back then.
Hmm. And what was it like going from the PET to the Apple II and the C64?
It was, well, let's see. So on the PET, I was doing all basic coding, and then on the Apple II, I realized I needed to learn 6502. So assembly programming's just a lot more technically challenging, than doing basic. And back then it was, in some ways, it was more difficult because the processors were so slow. So it was a lot of work to optimize everything and get it working well. Whereas the PET was pretty simple to work on. I mean, you were limited. You couldn't do a game that was as good because it didn't have any graphics. But in some ways, that's liberating because you have to work within the bounds of the machine. And so the graphics were all done with just ASCII, So like on the PET, I wrote a game where kind of like a snakebite game, and it's just done on the text screen, and so you've got like blocks animating around the screen, but it's just text. But it's pretty cool. It looks like it's in real time animating, but it's just filling in the text grid on the bot. It's like it's probably like 40 by 24 as I recall. Whereas working on the Apple II, it was pixels, so you actually had pixels, and it was what was it? I think it was 280 by 192 or 320 by 192 or something like that. I can't even remember now, but yeah, that's what it was.
Those are some small dimensions.
Yeah, exactly. That's like one texture now for one character,
Yeah. And what was it like working in 3D in those days?
Yeah, it was pretty hard because, well, first of all, early on it was just wireframe. So the market, in a way, is small for a game like that because people that are sort of like me, programmer types, you can kind of see what's going on in a wireframe, but other people, I show the game to them and they say, I don't understand. There's just all these weird lines moving around. And I'm like, no, don't you see that's a tank? That looks like a tank there, and that's an airplane. But they don't see it because it's wireframe, So it was a lot different at the very beginning, but it was also tough because there wasn't really very much literature on how to do 3D graphics, so you had to invent everything. You had to figure out all the math yourself, and you couldn't go read a book of algorithms to explain it, But that's kind of how all that was back then. There wasn't hardly any knowledge at all on how you do anything, so you just have to read the technical manuals on the hardware and then sort of figure out how in the world you're going to get it to do anything.
That does sound painstaking.
Yeah, I guess that's a good word, painstaking. That's kind of how it was.
I'm like, do you ever miss it?
No, I still program a little bit, and I like programming. I just sort of enjoy it, but it's not the main thing that I do.
Right.
That kind of programming, I don't think I miss. I think when I was younger, I could really focus and concentrate with all my energy on a task, and you lose that a little bit as you get older, and you also lose interest in doing that kind of thing. I still like solving difficult technical challenges, but not the painstaking stuff where you're counting every cycle of every operation. That's just so detailed and so tiny, but it's I don't miss that part of it, but I do like coding still. It's still fun. I do a little bit of Python programming right now.
Right, and so moving forward, Dynamics. How did this company get created?
So in Eugene, there was various people who I think were attracted to the Apple II. That was the main one, but then the Commodore 64 came along, and people started getting interested in that. And so strange creative people started being interested in these devices, and they'd show up at the various computer stores. And there was one in particular in Eugene called Computer Tutor that we would all meet at, and it was a software store that sold games mostly, well, word processors and games, but it wasn't a hardware store, which was new at the time because back then most of the stores just sold the computers, but this was a store where the guy was mostly selling software. And so I got to meet the owner, and his name was Jeff Tennell, and also a lot of people would show up there, and we'd all got to be friends. And so Jeff was a guy who always wanted to start companies. That's just kind of how he was. He was real entrepreneurial, and he had worked for the phone company for a while, and he hated it. And so he realized he didn't want to work for anyone else. And so he knew I was a good programmer because I was programming Stellar 7 at the time. And he asked me if I wanted to start a company with him. And so I agreed. And within, I don't know, a few months or a year, I'm not sure exactly how long, we found a couple new partners to add, Richard Hicks and Kevin Ryan. And so we had 4 partners in the company, and then we started looking for contracts. And so we got a big well, at the time it was a big contract with Electronic Arts to do Arctic Fox, which was sort of a follow-on to Stellar 7 in a way. They had seen Stellar 7, and so they knew we knew how to program, and they were pushing the Amiga real hard at the time, and so they knew we had the technical skills, and so they gave us a contract to develop a more elaborate kind of 3D tank game for the Amiga, and so we agreed to do that, and that was our primary focus. But we also picked up some porting jobs for them as well, where we were converting some of their other games over to the Amiga and the Macintosh, like Skyfox was one of those. And that was sort of the very beginning. We did a little bit of work before EA with another company called Penguin Software, but that didn't go very far and didn't last very long. But sort of as we were getting these contracts, we started hiring people from around, we're slowly growing from, 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, that kind of thing. And just making it up as we went. We didn't know what we were doing. We're just like, let's do this. Let's try this.
That's a surprise. That's a maybe not so surprising refrain from that era. We've had many people who got started, in the early days, and yeah, there's a whole lot of, seat of the pants, mainly because the industry was just being built in those days. So, like, how could there be a plan for this thing?
Yeah, exactly. There are no best practices. There's no practices. Period.
Yeah.
Nobody knows.
For all they know, they could wake up one morning and nobody wants video games anymore. Go the way of the Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I was doing it, my sister thought I was weird. Why would you waste your time doing this weird activity,
Right.
I'm like, because I have to. I love it. I don't care if anyone wants to play my games. I just want to make games.
Right. Yeah. Once again, that's a story we've heard before on the program. Like, both new and old, so to speak. Anyway, so working on the Amiga, especially doing 3D stuff on the Amiga, what was that like? Considering, the Amiga was quite more powerful than the C64, but wasn't really renowned for doing 3D work.
Yeah, you're right. So it was really hyped by, obviously, the people at Amiga and also the people at Electronic Arts for having an incredible amount of power. But it didn't have, as much power as they said it did. It was probably 1/10 as much power as they said. So it was overhyped. So in a way, it's a harder problem because the expectations are so much higher, that you can drive this, beautiful 3D scene in real time and get a good frame rate, and you just couldn't. And the biggest problem with the Amiga was really the blitter, which was basically their bitmap fill chip, their GPU essentially that would push pixels to the screen, was just way too slow, you know. And so when you're pushing a lot of bits, even if they're just solid fill kinds of things, it's just was really slow. And so we had to work really hard just to get a frame rate of like 2 or 3 frames a second, you know, but at the time that was more acceptable than it is now. Now, of course, your game would just be dead. Nobody would play it, you know.
well, it's like back then pushing 3D was extremely difficult, like nigh impossible in a lot of regards. So yeah, you know, just getting to the 3D realm was an accomplishment. I mean, you know, 3D didn't get good until like the 90s.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And anyway, Dynamics certainly had a reputation for doing really hardcore simulator games. Like after Stellar 7, there was a A10 Tank Killer. And was that a deliberate choice moving forward, or is just something you fell into, so to speak?
It was kind of both. I mean, so because I had started doing tank games like Stellar 7, you know, I was used to that, and then Electronic Arts. I mean, they were pretty smart about the market, I think, and so they said, well, you know, simulations sell better than science fiction kind of deals, which isn't really true anymore, but at the time it was true. And they'd seen that with flight simulators, and they said, well, we want you to do a tank game, but we want it to be a simulation of a real tank. And so I agreed to do a M1 Abrams tank simulation game for them. And so that's where I started switching from, like on Stellar 7, you know, it's a sci-fi game. My source material was some games by Steve Jackson. I don't know if you know him, the board game guy.
Well, there are actually 2 Steve Jackson games. Like, I'm assuming you're talking about the U.S. Steve Jackson.
I guess so. He was a board game designer, or is even still. I think he's active. But later on he did GURPS, but at the time that he hadn't invented that. But he did these. He did these games like Ogre and GEV, and they were these little micro metagames, he called them, or whatever.
Yeah, that's the U.S. The U.K. Steve Jackson, they're the ones who did Fighting Fantasy and Sorcery.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I don't know that guy, but I used to buy all the games by the U.S. Steve Jackson, and that was my source material. But so when I switched to doing, because you know, I'm a programmer as much as anything, and so I like to have source material for the design, you know, and so to get ideas and stuff. You know, I'm not as much of a writer where I want to create like my whole world and story or whatever. But so when I started doing simulations, then it was like, oh, there's all this source material, and you just go and, you know, you read all these history books and technical books and find out, you know, what were the vehicles like and what was it like, and you know, what are you trying to simulate? So it helped a lot. Anyway, so I did the tank game for Electronic Arts, and then I got interested in simulations because they sold well. And but what I noticed, you know, so it's going from sci-fi to simulation because they do better. But what I also noticed was that flight games did better than tank games. They sold better, and so I'm like, well, I want to do a flight game, you know. And so that's why I decided the next game was going to be a airplane game. You know, and of course it's going to be combat because that's a game, whereas a simulation with that, I liked games, you know, and so without combat, it's not a game; it's just a simulator. And so I wanted to do, but I didn't want to just do like what everybody else was doing, which was all these jet simulations like F-16 and Falcon, you know. And for one thing, I didn't think they were that fun anyway. So that's why I picked the A10 because it was a more interesting environment to play in. And so that was sort of the reason that we got into, or I got into doing air combat flight simulation games. That was sort of the beginning of it for me. Just sort of like that was more where the market was, and I knew how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it lined up really well with what was going on technically at Dynamics, because we were getting good at what we were doing. And at that point, I think right about the time we released A10, we had the best 3D graphics engine in the industry. We had sort of passed everyone else. It was really the time the VGA card came out, because we mastered the card and we got full 256 colors out of it, which at the time everybody else was just doing 4 or 16 colors. And so it might not sound like a big deal, but it really was a big deal, because you could make the environments look realistic and stuff with the color palette.
Right. Like, granted, it is kind of hard to impart just how big a leap some of these things are to the world of today.
Yeah.
To what's long ago. Like, anyway, in terms of the simulators here, in addition to your research, did you actually work with like either the manufacturers of the vehicles or the Department of Defense on these projects?
No, I mean, the source material was mostly just books, not people. So we'd go and just buy Jane's aircraft or whatever, and read it and get all the specs on it, and then read books and things like that of what the thing was like. Later on Red Baron, we started. Well, obviously we couldn't talk to anyone about that because they were all dead, because it was World War I. But
right.
we did hire a historian, military historian, to help with making it more authentic and realistic, and so he helped a lot. And of course, but then he's doing the same thing. He's going and reading all the materials and trying to figure it out. But yeah, there's not a lot. I mean, you read the accounts. Like I spent a lot of time reading the journals of some of the World War I pilots. Their actual, or the translations of them, of what it was like. And you're trying to figure out, how do you simulate that experience on a computer? So it's more than just trying to simulate a machine or an airplane. You're trying to simulate the experience that they were having, as well as the experiences that were in the minds of the pilots. What were the challenges that they faced, and how do you map that onto a computer? Because like a lot of the challenges they were facing were physical. Like, it was cold. Well, you can't do that on a computer. Unless somebody hooks up a fan that blows in their face or something. I don't know. But so you're like, how do you get that onto the computer? Or how do you get, like another challenge they faced was they were flying at altitude, and so they'd get dizzy after a while, right? I mean, this is a real thing. And so then you're like, okay, well, how about if they fly at too high of an altitude for too long? Then the screen starts kind of fading out, and they can't really see what's going on, that kind of thing,
Yeah. World War II aircraft is a very specific and difficult thing to emulate, because, well, it's very primitive. Which is probably why we haven't seen a lot of those kind of games. Like, really, outside of Red Baron, I'm trying to think of someone else who tackled World War I flight, and I'm coming up blank.
I'm glad you say that, because that means we did our job. Because a lot of other people did try to tackle World War I, and I think they failed. So you're only remembering Red Baron, so that makes me happy.
Well, it's like, well, when I think of Dynamics, it is like Red Baron at the top of the list there.
Uh-huh.
But before we get to that, Sierra Online. How did Sierra Online come into the picture in terms of Dynamics?
So we were, we worked with a bunch of publishers. We started with Electronic Arts, and after a while, we realized that it was sort of a one-sided relationship, and it wasn't really to our benefit at all to continue working with them. They just controlled the money too tight, and we weren't getting enough of the pie, and they didn't show a great interest in taking care of our welfare, So we sort of branched out, and we worked with Accolade a little bit, and we started working with Activision, and Activision had sort of died but come back to life. Because they'd been into consoles and stuff, but then that failed, and so they kind of came back to life in the PC world. But I mean, they almost died. Now they're a big deal, but they were almost dead. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, go
The
ahead.
big thing was the big Mediagenic push.
Yeah, Mediagenic, sure. That was when that's when we were working with them. Yeah, that whole deal. But so we start working with them, and they wanted good developers because I mean they wanted to compete with Electronic Arts, so we were a valuable target for them to say we really want to work with you, and so they really helped us through that period of transitioning away from Electronic Arts. And we were also talking to Sierra and Broderbund at the same time, just because you got to shop around and look at all the publishers and stuff. And but we also just didn't really want to be a captive developer anymore, because you're just on a gerbil wheel and you're not going anywhere. You're just running as hard as you can and you're not going anywhere. And that's basically the model that was all the publishers set up, because developers are more naive than the publishers, and they don't really know business, and they don't really know what they're doing as much as the publishers do. And so you're always addicted to the cash flow, and you're sort of all, they don't have any risk because they can just cut you off whenever they want. But if you're doing great, then they'll just keep working with you. But it's a one-sided relationship. So you got to go and try to get multiple suitors going. And so we finally started to get smart and start working with Activision. But at the same time, we were talking to the others, and what happened was Jeff was talking to Ken Williams and said, Ken's like, well, what are you doing? And Ken's asking what we're doing, and Jeff told him, well, we've got these 5 titles we're going to do for Activision this year, and then we're going to ship 2 of our own at the same time. So we're going to launch 7 titles in 1 year. And we were probably only about 28 people at the time, and Ken didn't believe anyone could do that. He said, well, that's crazy. Nobody can ship that many titles in 1 year. But we did, because we had to. We were at that point, we were just really good. I mean, we were really good at making games at that point. We had gotten good. Just it's like if you survive long enough, you become good. You're not good, but if you can somehow manage to survive, you'll end up being good, because you just know what you're doing because you made all the mistakes. And so we had done. I don't remember all the titles for Activision. It was like Die Hard, Ghostbusters, Death Track, Mech Warrior, and one more one. I always forget what it was. And then the 2 we did on our own was A 10 Tank Killer and David Wolf's Secret Agent. So we shipped 7 titles, but we realized that, and the 2 that we shipped on our own were through Activision, through an affiliate publishing deal. And so we got a bigger chunk of the revenue, and that was great, but it was, and A10 was starting to show that it was going to be a hit, but the money was coming too slow. That's just how it is, like, you end up not getting your money for like 90 days later, and you got a slow ramp and everything. We realized, man, we're just going to run out of money. So we were talking to Sierra and said, hey, would you like to sign some projects with us or invest, And Ken said, no, but I'd like to buy you. So that shocked us. We weren't ready for a purchase offer. But that's basically what happened there, and that's why he was interested. Because he was smart, and he realized that acquisitions might be a smart way to go instead of just hiring developers, which is what Electronic Arts and Activision were doing. He wanted to instead buy development, and that was kind of a new idea back then. And it was smarter because it also shows, I think, a healthier view towards the relationship, as opposed to don't treat developers as these captive developers that are almost like your slaves. Bring them in and take care of them and that kind of thing. And you're going to get higher quality products too that way, I think, because developers are always just so tight on cash. They're barely able to make payroll and everything, and the schedules are tight, and so they want to cut corners on quality and stuff. But when you're when you're part of the same company as the publisher, they're going to pump money into it because they want to build a great product. And so I think that's part of it. Sierra was really product focused, and their budgets were just a lot bigger than the other companies at the time. EA wanted to spend all their money on marketing. They wanted to save all their money for marketing and license deals. They didn't want to spend very much money on development back then. But Sierra was like, the size of our development teams probably tripled once the purchase happened with Sierra. Our teams got a lot bigger, so we were able to make the games a lot bigger, a lot fatter. I mean, there's like, if you just look at Red Baron, the amount of content in a game like Red Baron versus a game like Arctic Fox, there's no comparison. I mean, Red Baron's probably like, I don't know, 5 to 10 times more content than a game like Arctic Fox.
Yeah.
Well, just as a point, the budget for Arctic Fox was $35,000, and the budget for Red Baron was $600,000. So there you go. Which now $600,000 is not very much, but at the time that was a lot.
600,000 is on the lower end of the indie scale.
Yeah, nowadays, sure. But people also get paid a lot more now than they did back then.
Right. Anyway, going back to Red Baron, was anything else besides the desire to have a different kind of simulator for spearhead the development of Red Baron? Like, why World War I?
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, that's a good question. So after doing A-10 Tank Killer, I wanted to do another air combat game, and I was inspired by Their Finest Hour, the Larry Holland game. It was a nice game about first it was 1942, and then it was Their Finest Hour, which was about the Battle of Britain. And so I saw the beauty of doing a historical simulation, and so I didn't want to just go do what he had just done. And so World War I was the obvious choice. Also, we were playing a game in the office at that time on the Mac called Dogfight. I think that the entire name was Dogfight with an exclamation mark. And it basically was a Fokker triplane arcade battle with a Red Baron. And it was really simple. Like, you just fight one-on-one, and you'd end up going in circles trying to shoot this other airplane down, But it was fun. And that's always the thing about a game. Can you find a kernel of fun at the very core of the game, and then can you build a game around that, So a kernel of fun is something that you can do for hours and hours, It's fun. I mean, like in a shooter, just running around and shooting, it's a very simple thing, but it's fun. People have spent millions of hours. Humanity spent millions of hours doing it at this point. But so those were sort of the two inspirations for it. And so, but originally though, I was actually going to do all history in one game. I was going to do World War I and World War II, just all at once, just one game that just had everything. Because I had read this book called The Great Warplanes, and it was really neat. It showed all these cool planes and stuff, and maybe even Korea and throw it in there. And so Ken Williams heard that, and then so he sent me a letter. It was kind of funny. He didn't really want to interfere with my creative process, I think. So he wouldn't just say, "No, you're going to do this." He just sent me a very polite letter, and he said, we found at Sierra that it's the sequels that end up making all the money. The first one's expensive to develop, but the sequels actually sell better because people like your game over time, and that's what they had done with King's Quest 1 and 2 and 3, etc. And so if you just do everything at once, you can't do any sequels. So what about just doing a smaller piece, And I read it, and at first I was just like, hey, what's this guy trying to tell me what to do? But it wasn't like that. He's very polite. He said, but I leave it up to you. And I just realized he was completely right. And then it was even better because then you could really focus on one era and just do a ton of depth, on one era instead of this sort of broad survey of the entire history of air combat, just really focus on one era and really, burrow in. And so that was the reason for Red Baron, and then why World War I specifically. It was because I always thought jet games were boring, and I thought the slower the airplane, the more fun it's going to actually play, which I think is still true. Because if the planes are slow, they have to get really close to each other, so they're big on the screen and you can see them, and there's just more. It's just more fun, and so that's
it's theoretically cool that nowadays you can get a target lock and fire a missile at something hundreds of miles away with pretty much perfect accuracy. But it's not very much fun in a game to like. I mean, at that point, you might as well just be playing like Missile Command.
Well, yeah, it's whoever happens to be sitting in the better airplane, right?
Uh-huh.
So who's the pilot for the better country that's got the better tech,
That is how actual warfare is usually fought.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. It's like, anyway, we got a question over Facebook about all of this. James wants to know if you could make a new approachable flight sim, maybe F-19 remade with modern graphics, but 1990 gameplay and controls. Basically, I think he's asking how feasible would a game like this be in today's world.
So he wants to do something like a stealth fighter kind of game. Is that the deal?
I guess.
Yeah, well, you could do it. I mean, I think the biggest thing is you have to judge the market. Are you going to be able to? I mean, that's always the thing. First of all, is the market there so that if you actually build the game, are you going to pay off the development costs? And second of all, are you going to be able to get the funding from somebody to build the game? And so those are like the challenges. And obviously, he's interested in that type of game, which means other people are interested in that type of game, So there's an interest there. You're not going to get a publisher to fund that game because they just don't fund. Well, they don't fund simulations really. It's kind of sad, So you'd almost have to either do it as an indie somehow, and just keep your budget really low, and then plan to launch it on Steam or something like that, and just hope it's really good, or you'd have to try to do crowdfunding and do a big campaign to get it funded. But in terms of the game itself, I mean, I know that the Microprose Stealth Fighter game was really popular, and a lot of people really liked playing it. So, I mean, I think that's what people have proven recently, is that a lot of those old games, the gameplay is solid. So if you build that game, people will buy it and they will play it. So I think it's totally feasible. And of course, with engines, it would look way better than any of these games did in the past, and would be a lot easier to develop.
Right.
So yeah, I think it would totally work. Sure. But I think the funding would be your biggest challenge, getting it funded.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Honestly, this kind of game, this kind of hardcore simulation game, hasn't really been popular since, I'd say, the late 90s. The likes of, say, Falcon 4.0 and Microsoft, and the later Microsoft Flight Simulators really being the last hurrahs.
Right. Yeah, no, I know. It's and what I noticed was right as I was starting to leave the industry, I did Ace of the Pacific and then Aces Over Europe, and right as we released Aces Over Europe, I started to see a trend happening that I didn't think was healthy. There were certain players that wanted ultra realism, and if there was anything that was slightly off, they would just slam your game, and then they would all just rip the hell out of you on the forums or whatever. Whereas I always believed in sort of making a good simulation and a great game at the same time. And so a lot of those ultra realistic simulations weren't fun. So it's like, well, this is not. Yeah, you're playing to the vocal minority, and you're going to end up with no market. And I think that's what happened. These simulations, they killed. I think the audience killed its own market, its own segment, because nobody would make games because they couldn't make money anymore. because the games weren't fun, because these people were really demanding it. Europe still sold well, but at that time I realized we were going to have a battle with some of these people who were really vocal. But I think you started to see that change a little bit with the World of Tanks, and then War Thunder and stuff.
Right. Yeah. We had
and those are maybe a little too not realistic for me. I don't know, maybe a little bit, but I don't know. I still actually respect those efforts,
They have their place.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And I was trying to sell the idea of doing. So this was before World of Tanks. I was working with a company, and I was doing a game called Ace of Aces, which was sort of basically Red Baron with arena-based multiplayer combat. And I said, you're going to easily have 1 million people worldwide playing this game, because there's 1 million people easily worldwide that want to play a flight game in a competitive environment. But they didn't get it because they thought the simulation category was weak, Yeah, then World of Tanks came along, and it was like, no, you guys are idiots. Marry an MMO with multiplayer, and you're going to have a multiplayer simulation. You're going to have huge success. So.
Right. That was instant action, wasn't it?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it says instant action, and all they wanted to do was build tribes. They were building a clone of tribes, which is fine, but they just thought the only thing that would matter was a shooter. And at the time, I looked at all the games, and Ace of Aces, the World War I, was the best game they had in the lot of all of them. And I was like, why aren't you pushing tons of money behind this? But they were all obsessed with pushing this game called Legions at the time. And it was just like, this is not it, man. You're just copying something. You're copying another game, and you haven't, it's like a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. It's lost all of its soul. There's nothing here,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but whatever. I don't mean to say all that, but I mean, yeah, I think simulations can be fun and do well in the market.
Right.
But I think you have to make sure that what you're going for is, it still has to be a good game at the same time that it's an authentic feeling. I mean, the flip side really is there's these arcade simulation games that are crap, and you see those come out where it's just sort of a stupid arcade game with the skin of being a simulation. And, I can't remember of good examples of that, but there's a lot of them out there, and it's like, this is just crap.
Well, some of them are intentionally so. Like, they're the parody simulation game, like Goat Simulator.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, that's cool. I mean more like where they do a flight simulator, but it's really just an arcade game,
Right.
Like it doesn't even have real flight dynamics. You're just sort of almost moving in 2D or whatever and shooting or something, and it's like, this is dumb. Make an arcade game. Don't pretend it's a flight simulator.
Yeah, that was like Tom Clancy's Hawk series.
I didn't play that. That's how that played?
Yeah, the really arcadey, surprisingly arcadey when you see Tom Clancy on the title. Like,
okay. He played Stiller 7 for 3 years.
I'm like, somehow that doesn't surprise me. Like,
he called me up one day at Dynamics, and he said, hey, he said, yeah, I just wanted to let you know I really like Stiller 7. And he called me Ace the whole time. He kept calling me Ace. And he said he used it. He'd sit on his exercise bike and he'd play with a joystick. It was the only game he could play with just with a joystick,
Like, wow, that. I'm like, I'm not sure what else to say to that. But,
he sent me a signed book, so that was cool.
Which one?
Sum of All Fears.
I think I had a copy of that. Like, it's still amazing that he's making games, even though he's passed away for 5 years now.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I like those EA things that were done. The 686 Attack Sub and it was Red Storm Rising, and those were cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what.
Those are the games he actually worked on. Like, These days, Tom Clancy's has been a brand for a while now.
Yeah, he's just a brand.
I doubt he'd be very happy with what they did with like Wildlands and the Division
Well, it's like he got paid a ton of money for that, so whatever misgivings he might have had, they were allayed. Let's just say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably.
Oh, anyway, getting back on track here. So, what precipitated your egress from the industry, and also why did you come back?
So I left just because I was burnt out and hadn't done anything else since. I mean, I started making games when I was in high school, and that's pretty much all I did. 60 hours a week. I had no personal life. Dynamics started. It was a lot of stress. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of fun too. I mean, it was a really great environment with a lot of really amazing people and everything. But still, it was completely absorbing at the time. And I mean, I loved it. I loved making games, but it was all absorbing, and I felt like I had never done anything else in life, And so I just wanted to not be a slave to my career, so to speak. And so I wanted to just leave for a while and do something else, and just walk away. So that was sort of, I mean, it wasn't bad at Dynamics for me. I mean, I was well respected and I got along well with everyone, and I had a good team and everything, and they wanted me to stay, so it wasn't any bad blood or anything like that. But I was just burnt out, and I also wanted to just try something else, and that was the main reason why I left in 1993, 1994. I also wanted to go back to school and get my degree and do some other kinds of things. But I didn't think I was going to take so much time off from whatever my career was going to end up being. I just kept not doing anything for a long time. So I did. I got my pilot's license and learned to fly, got my degree, moved to San Francisco for a while, and then 12 years passed.
Right. Well, sometimes things happen.
Yeah.
But once again, what called you back?
I realized that I actually liked making games, and I missed it. And the other thing also is just, when you're young and you're like, man, it would be great if I never had to work, and then you realize, no, it actually really sucks. You don't have, in your life, you have to have meaning. And so you want to have, family, and you want to have friends, but you also want to have a career where you're doing something that gives you meaning or that you enjoy, And so you just sort of don't have purpose, even if you have family and friends. I still think you want more. And so that was what it was for me. Like, what am I doing? I'm not doing anything. And I did all this fun stuff for a long time, and that was great, scuba diving and all these kinds of fun things and traveling, whatever. But it's like, no, I want to do something. And so I actually got depressed. I mean, I got very depressed, and I think that's typical. I got extremely depressed. I'm like, this is terrible. I need to start doing things. And so I realized I wanted to make games again, because I actually like building games, apart from the 60 hours a week thing. So I didn't want to go back to that. That was not what I wanted. But I did want to work with people and collaborate creatively, and just working on a game dev team is really fun. I mean, it's really fun to collaborate with people and build things. Building is just a fun activity, because you get done and you look at it and you're like, hey, we built that. That's neat. And then players are like, hey, we really like this, So that was really what told me I needed to get off my ass and start doing something. And then an opportunity arose, because right at that exact moment, Garage Games had sold itself to Instant Action, and Instant Action was pumping a ton of money in to build games. And so they were in Eugene, and so they said, hey, we want you to build some games for us. So the opportunity just fell into my lap at that moment. So that was really what the transition was for me.
And what was it like going back to the industry after an absence of over 10 years.
It was, I didn't really know a lot anymore. I mean, I didn't know what the all the tools and the technologies were at this point. I mean, you could read about them, but I didn't really know them in and out. Whereas at Dynamics, I was completely fluent in everything. But now I was kind of like a novice almost. So that part took a long time. I would say, in a way, to become a true craftsman, it took years, to get back to where I felt like I understood all this stuff pretty well. Because you are sort of, you need to understand your craft, the design, the technology, the limitations, the market, all that kind of stuff. So it was a challenge, and I made a lot of mistakes, obviously. But other parts you still know and feel comfortable with. The part about fun, that's kind of the same. It's, you still want to have a fun game, and the way you go about doing that's the same. Working with a team, those are the same skills that I had before, but maybe changed a little bit. Because at Dynamics, it was different at Dynamics because we had started the company, and so I don't know. It was just different. It was at Mount Otter. I had a different philosophy on everything. For one thing, I didn't want to have a burnout place anymore. Dynamics had become a burnout place for people. I think the whole industry had sort of gone through that, and I wanted to have a place where we never worked overtime. So that was a goal. So it's like I wanted to. I would say at Dynamics, my number one goal at Dynamics was to build the greatest games the world had ever seen, and that was sort of like nothing else mattered, which includes, everyone, all the people and everything. I mean, I didn't not care about people, but the goal was to make the greatest games ever. And so, but at Mount Otter, I think the best goal was to have a meaningful place to work, not just for me, but for everyone. So everyone enjoys work. That doesn't mean you're just like sitting around and you're lazy and everyone's just, talking and bullshitting all day, because that's not meaningful work. That doesn't really satisfy you. I mean, meaningful work is still challenging. You want to work hard and you want to work together and you want to face difficult challenges, and really push yourself. So I think that was different at Mount Otter, where the goal was still it was the meaningful work, but no burnout, and making the greatest game was not number one, because I still you want to have a sustainable place where everyone's enjoying what they're doing. Anyway, so that was a little different, switching the priorities around a little bit. I mean, I still would put on the list, making great games. That's still obviously a goal. And then having a sustainable business, because if you have a really meaningful place to work, but you're not making enough money, you go out of business and it goes away and you no longer have a meaningful place to work, So you still have to take care of all the other things, but you don't go and say, oh, well, everybody's got to work the weekend now. Sorry. And we're going to be doing this for the next 6 months, or so long. Yeah.
Crunch is a real problem in this industry. And not just with the AAA sets, it's prevalent in the indie sector, maybe for different reasons, but the end result is the same.
Yeah, well, they don't have money, and they're running out of time and money, so they need to get it done. So the only way to do that is to crank like crazy,
Yeah, and it's just a very destructive philosophy. Like.
Yeah, and it comes out of a good place. I mean, you want to build a great game, but in the end, it turns negative,
Yeah, it does, because, well, it burns you out. Like, working that fast, that much on anything is gonna sour you on pretty much anything.
Yeah, and you start making mistakes, and yeah, it's ugly.
Anyway, it's good to hear that your current company is evading that as much as possible.
Yeah, I don't think we've done any overtime since we've started, which is insane, but yeah.
Anyway, so tracking back a bit, how did Mad Otter Games get
Okay, so like I said, there was a time when I wanted to get back in, and so I just ran into Jeff, my former partner at Dynamics, and I almost literally ran into him. I was driving my car, and he walked in front of me, and I'm like,
God.
Jeff, and he's like, Hey, what are you doing? He goes, Hey, you want to make a game? I'm like, Yeah. He goes, Okay, I can get you funding. I'm like, Okay. He's like, Come on in, I'll tell you about it. And so that was
By
it.
the way, don't kill me.
Yeah. But it literally, and so I went in and we just worked out it. We just worked out a contract and got funding, and so then it was just putting a team together, And so I just found a lot of the people that I was telling you about at the beginning from that store, the Computer Tutor that I knew way back, from like 1980, and other people I'd worked with at Dynamics, because it's easier if you can just pick out people that you already know are good and that you work well with. So we put a team together of about 5 or 6 people, and and we got funding to do 2 games, Villagers and Heroes, which is still live, and then Ace of Aces. It was the World War I game that I told you about, and so we got funding to build those 2 games, and that kept us going for I don't know, 2.5 years maybe. And then at some point it became obvious that instant action was going to be a failure, and so I had to scramble to figure out what we were going to do now that they were dying, and they never really launched a game. I mean, they sort of had some games live, but they were in beta and they weren't really making money yet, and so I had to figure out what I was going to do, how I was going to move forward, and get the rights out from Instant Action and find somebody else. So that was tough. That was really tough. So in some ways, I faced different challenges at Mad Otter than at Dynamics. There was a lot more business challenges for me at Mad Otter than there were at Dynamics.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it, since Dynamics had a bit more leverage, I'd say, given everything.
Yeah, well, I think we started having success earlier, and there was a lot less competition back then. It was still a challenge, and it was hard, and we still had a lot of tight months or whatever, but there was just a lot less competition, I mean, hardly anybody was making games back then. Certainly there weren't games getting made in China for, $1 an hour or whatever. And so, and then also Jeff was handling a lot of the business stuff at Dynamics, and I was more on the development side. So at Mad Otter, though, I was doing the business role. So there was a lot more just stuff I've never had to deal with before.
So I suppose the question that beckons here is, how was Villagers and Heroes saved?
Well, we got a deal with a company in Germany called Neonga, and they were a startup. Germany had a government program where the German government realized that that German companies weren't good at startups. They didn't understand startups, and so the government started putting money into startups. And so a bunch of ex-Frogster guys, who were the guys that had launched Runes of Magic, which was a big hit, which was an import from Taiwan, basically a WoW clone, a free-to-play WoW clone, but exactly the right game at the right time, because it was the first really good free-to-play WoW clone. Later on, those other people did them and they failed, but they were just perfect timing. And so Frogster was a huge success. And so these guys left Frogster and they were going to start their own company, and they needed a title, an MMO to get behind. And so we met them at GDC and worked out a deal where we'd get the rights back from Instant Action and then start working with this German company, Neonga. And so they arranged funding for us in exchange for the license. They gave us some money, that kind of thing, and they were going to give us a rev share. And so they got behind the title, and they gave us some money and everything, and they launched. But they quickly ran out of money, unfortunately. Well, not quickly. It was about 1.5 years, I think, or 2 years before they ran out of money. And what happened then was they once again I was in the same position, like, oh no, the publisher's failing. What am I gonna do? And we still believed in the product, and so how do we get the rights back, and how do we keep it live? And they were actually really good partners on working that out, because they knew they couldn't carry the ball forward anymore, and so they worked out a deal with us where we would take over the publishing rights, and they would go back to a much smaller team. But it was sad to see them not succeed. I think they had about 25 people at their company, which is a huge burn rate. I mean, that's a lot of cash flow when you've got 25 people on payroll and you've only got one product.
Yeah.
And we were the only Well, actually, they did later on pick up 2 more titles, but one of them was just too small to be worth anything. It was a game called World of Ants, and the other one was Dragon Soul Online, which was a Chinese game, but unfortunately, that game was crap. So they had done a deal with it. They were going to also publish a Chinese MMO, but I think under the hood it was just garbage, because they got the game, and I think the Chinese company kind of fooled them. They made it look really nice, but I think it was just garbage. And so Nihonga got behind this game, Dragon Soul Online, but then it quickly just fell apart. And so they had just devoted a lot of resources to that. So, and then the Chinese company just disappeared. It was there's a lesson there.
Possibly. And
I mean,
so
the lesson is, the problem with working with Chinese companies is there's no legal recourse if you get ripped off. Like, you can't sue them in China and get your money back.
Yet it's really big business, so I'm like, people work with them.
Oh no, China's great. I would partner with China if I could, like, partner with a Chinese publisher or something.
Right.
But I would want the money up front, and I wouldn't buy something from them and give them all the money. I would be like, no, you give me the thing and we can publish it and you'll get a rev share or something. But otherwise, they sell you something and then they're gone, and they're just gone. It's like, what are you going to do? That
Right.
story is really common. I've talked to a lot of other developers and publishers that have worked and just gotten burned. I'm not saying I don't like China or Chinese people. But it's this thing that happens because there's no legal recourse at all, because the Chinese government is always going to side with the Chinese company.
And they have very different philosophies of business and stuff because communism.
Yeah, and the other deal is the contract doesn't mean anything, which doesn't make sense to an American or a German, for example. It's like, no, the contract is, that's what we said then, but that's not today. We're changing the rules now. But that's not considered cheating, right? In their culture, that's not cheating. That's just business, Like, no, we're not going to pay you that now, We've got more business leverage, so sorry, it's changed, Whereas Americans and Germans are very literal. No, this is exactly what the contract says, and you have to do exactly that, So it's a difference in culture. Anyway,
so after the German thing went south, what was next for Villagers and Heroes?
So yeah, we still maintained a partnership with them because they still ran the servers, and we would give them. They still were supporting the game in Germany, and they were assisting in the development or whatever. So it wasn't a hostile change at all. In fact, we're still friendly with them to this day. So, but it was a switch of responsibilities. So we still work with them, but we are now the publisher. We are now the publisher of the game, not Nihonga. Nihonga does still operate the game in Germany for the German market, and they take care of that market, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, or whatever. So I don't want to say that it was like a negative thing or whatever at all. What we did was our first goal after Nyong'o was to get on Steam, and we thought that would be the holy grail and save us. And so we did. We worked really hard to get on Steam, and it looked like it was, because when we launched on Steam, we were getting 1,000 players an hour. It was insane. We've never, we didn't expect that at all. But that's just how Steam works. When you launch on Steam, they just send everyone your way. And of course, we weren't ready for 1,000 players an hour. The CDN that delivered all the files crashed halfway through, and we're like, oh shit, we can't even handle all these players. Typical MMO story,
Right.
But that only lasted,
yeah.
but it only lasted for like a week, So then it was like, oh, the players have all dried up, And so it was great. Steam was great, but it wasn't our salvation, I mean, it certainly helped us a lot for sure, but it wasn't a sustainable thing, and so we realized, man, this didn't save us, and we're still not where we need to be, And then so, but I was always looking and wanting to get on mobile myself. I just was like, man, I'm really interested in mobile. Like, why aren't we on mobile, And so everyone I talked to said, oh, you can never get this game to run on mobile. It's going to be way too hard. Oh, there's no way. It's you can't run. It's using the Torque game engine. It's way too hard. And I'm like, come on. I know we can get it to do it. And then this one guy that I'm friends with said, well, no, you could do it. I could do it. I'll do it. So he ported it to Android and iOS after all these other
phones are getting more powerful all the time, so.
Yeah, and he also said, hey, these chips are good. I looked at them, they're good, and it's just OpenGL and whatever.
It's also the Torque game engine had an optimization for mobile forever.
So you are. I'm glad to hear you're familiar with Torque. A lot of people have forgotten all about it now that Unity's come along, but.
It's part of the job description.
Yeah. Well, Torque was the original. It was the original thing. It was before Unity, and they had the same business model basically.
Yeah, it's like I remember playing some games in Torque, especially like Marble Blast.
Yeah, Marble Blast was their biggest hit for sure. Yeah. And Torque actually to this day still has the best networking engine of any of these game engines. It's just state of the art still. But the graphics have fallen behind, because it hasn't been maintained.
Yeah, I'm like, not, unfortunately, I think you're the first person we've talked to that, or at least in a long time that works at the Torque engine. Like,
oh yeah, I don't think anybody else does now. Everybody's in Unity or one of the others.
Unity, Unreal 4, maybe Game Maker. It's like. Yeah, Torque, like 10 years ago, Torque was pretty prominent.
Yep. No, that's a great tragedy because Garage Games could have been Unity if they had kept their eye on the ball. And I'm sad because, it's a Eugene company. I live in Eugene, a medium-sized city, and it's just like, wow, they could have been Unity if they hadn't taken their eye off the ball.
And I'm guessing that networking is what keeps you on the Torque game engine?
Well, it's that and legacy. I mean, porting to another engine at this point would well, as the programmers have told me, Damon, it's not a port, it's called a rewrite. I'm like, yeah, that's not just a port, that's a rewrite.
Okay.
So it would be a lot of work.
I imagine. But,
and this guy that ported it to Android and iOS said there actually might be problems with Unity because the footprint's larger. And he said, yeah, you're going to have memory problems if you port it to Unity, It's because it's a really big game and like most of the Unity games on mobile are really small.
Right. But are you ever concerned about Torque given, not a lot of people use it these days, like support drying up?
Oh, there's zero support for Torque, like zero. So we have the source codes. We do everything ourselves. But in fact, this guy that did the port, he wrote a lot of Torque in the first place. So,
So you are basically keeping the legacy alive.
Yeah,
I guess
But I
that's one
think
way
we're-
to do it.
I think we're the end of the line, though. I don't think there will be another. I don't think there will be anything after this.
I'm like, not in the future sense. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe somebody will go and, I don't know, revive some of the old Garage Games IP.
I know. There's some good IP there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and he did the game Think Tanks, and of that game, I guess apparently he's still got players, which is crazy. It's just this funny little game, but it actually plays really well. You know, it's like this really fun game.
Yeah, Think Tanks was a highlight of the original Xbox Live Arcade.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know, it's like, I don't know how many people remember like the original on the original Xbox Live Arcade. It was
Yeah, not
really
the Xbox 360 Live Arcade.
Yeah, the original Xbox did have an Xbox Live Arcade. It was a very small selection of games, but Garage Games was there with Think Tanks. I'm like, I don't think that got ported to the Xbox 360 arcade. Marble Blast did, but you know, they were there. Like,
Yeah.
So and yeah, I'm like, anyways, shifting a bit. You did manage to reacquire the rights to Red Baron, correct?
Yeah, and that was not something that we were trying to do. It just happened randomly.
Okay, I gotta hear this. Like, what did Activision just contact you out of the blue and say, "Here's Red Baron"?
So what happened was Instant Action had a name that they had trademarked for a racing game, and Activision wanted the name, and they said, "We want this name," and Instant Action didn't really need it, and so they did a deal, and they did a swap with Activision, where they gave Activision this racing name, and then Activision gave them the rights to Red Baron, the rights to the Incredible Machine, and my guess is some large amount of money. I don't actually know the terms of the deal, but my guess would have been some large sum of money.
So basically, they bought the name with intellectual property rights and probably also money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so one of the things was Red Baron, and Instant Action didn't really have anything that it needed Red Baron for, because, you know, I wrote Red Baron, and what are they going to do with Red Baron? And so they said, "Hey, do you want Red Baron? You know, and what would you offer us for it?" And so basically, I just worked out a little deal where I said, "Well, I'll do more work on Ace of Aces for free. We'll give you an extra milestone on this, and then you just give us the rights to Red Baron." So basically, I had to do like an extra month of work or something like that on Ace of Aces, which they were publishing anyway, so it was kind of a win-win. And then they gave us the rights to Red Baron, and that's how we picked it up. But I wasn't seeking those rights, and in fact, I had sought those rights probably 10 or 15 years earlier from Activision, but Activision wanted like $1 million or something, and I'm like, "You're crazy, there's no way," you know. So we said, "Nah, I'm not going to pay you that much," or whatever.
Yeah, that's.
And then later on, they're just giving it away for peanuts, you know. It's like, well, why do you have to hold on to it if you don't have any use for it? But anyway, that's how it is with the companies.
Like, yeah, because they think it might be of some value, and I don't know. I guess Activision was kind of right there, as it helped them get the racing game name.
Yeah, but I think it was really just the cash that got them the game.
Yeah, true enough. But anyway, so what have you done with Red Baron, if anything?
So we tried to do a Kickstarter with Red Baron to get it crowdfunded, and it just failed. And so I kind of gave up. It's like you were asking, one of your viewers asked about F-119. It's like, well, funding is the hard part of these deals, and you know, we had all the pieces in place. We had the right team. You know, this is a team that would have known how to build Red Baron. We had the name Red Baron. You know, we were ready to go, and we did a Kickstarter campaign, and it just fell short. It failed, and we quit after about a week because it was obvious it wasn't going to make it. I think maybe we were gonna maybe get to, you know, half of our goal or something, and so we just gave up. Did make some mistakes. We made a couple mistakes on it. One was a PR mistake. We should have built a community up before we started the campaign. And so I had listened to a press agent guy, a PR guy, and he said, "Oh yeah, you don't want to pre-announce it because if they read about it and then they go to look it up and the crowdfunding campaign's not started yet, they're not going to put any money in. They're just going to disappear, and you've lost your opportunity." But it was completely wrong. You want to build a community first, you know, around a website and forums, so that by the time you launch your crowdfunding, everybody's ready to go, you know, and the word's gotten out. So that was one mistake, and so I screwed up on that. And then the other mistake was we did some graphics for the game, some video, and it just was not good enough. It looked too arcadey. It didn't look realistic enough, and so I feel like we kind of blew it there. I think the other parts of the Kickstarter we did well, but anyway, that's what happened with Kickstarter, and that was sort of the end of Red Baron, because it was a lot of work for us to do this, and we didn't get any money back. And when you're a small developer, that really hurts, you know.
Right.
When the whole team spends 6 weeks on something and you just wasted all that time and you didn't get any money for it, it can put you out of business, you know.
Yeah. I do believe at the very least the classic Red Barons are available on Steam and GOG, correct?
Yeah, they are, and we sell those there, but it's not a big source of revenue for us, you know. And of course, I would just love to get them updated to a modern engine, because it would just be so much better. I can't believe it. I go back to those old games and I play them. I'm like, wow, this isn't what I remembered. I remembered them having these amazing graphics, you know. And I'm not
amazing graphics
them.
are even more relative than a lot of other things being amazing.
It's true. I mean, but so much of it was done by the imagination of the players, you know. Mm-hmm. Like when the ground is just a big one single brown polygon, it's like, whoa. Or green, maybe. Oh, it's green, and the sky is just one. You just got two giant polygons on the screen for the ground and the sky.
I mean, has anyone ever approached you with like acquiring Red Baron, or wanting to do a new Red Baron?
No, we haven't. I mean, I've sort of asked around and I've pushed and tried to get investment and talked to publishers and stuff, and they're just not interested in doing simulations. They just see it as a dead category for them. And I think that's where they're a little short-sighted. I mean, I think that's what Brian Fargo proved with his Kickstarters, that these games were fun and there's still people that would play them, you know. And then, of course, he executed his Kickstarters so much better than we did. But there's just not, you know, and then it's frustrating as a game maker when you see a big opportunity, which is how I felt about when we were doing Ace of Aces, which was a World War I air combat meets MMO, you know, online, arena-based, you know, the whole World of Tanks thing, you know. It was like, man, this could be huge, but everyone's like, no one plays those games anymore. So it's disappointing.
Yeah. I mean, do you know the state of the Ace of Aces these days? Like outside of, I know it's not active, but like, has anyone tried to revive that in the wake of World of Tanks?
Well, no. I mean, and we have all the code and we have all the rights and stuff, but we would need to get a partner for it. I mean, I would almost do it, but it's that thing where we'd have to invest probably 2 people for 5 months on the project, you know? And without any funding for it, and then launch it on Steam or whatever and see how it goes. But even so, without a lot of money to really up the art, I don't think it would do well. You just have to have you have to really bring the art up to snuff, because that's just what the gamers, especially on Steam, want. They want to have the really nice, the physically based rendering, textures, and the the Unreal Engine kind of look, and just this ultra realistic kind of look, and it's expensive to build all that. So I really feel
we're a little bit past the literal days of if a current computer can run it, it's too primitive. But
Yeah.
not by as much as you'd wish.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that would be... I mean, you can do the thing where you just go for great gameplay and then hope that that carries you into the future, but it's a little risky,
And anything simulation-ish is going to get a lot more.
Well, who knows? Maybe
even
one
remotely.
day. Who knows? Maybe one day THQ Nordic will be knocking on your door.
Yeah. Well, and I saw the game that Wargaming did, their airplane game, World of Warplanes or whatever they called it. I don't know, and they made a lot of mistakes. Whereas War Thunder did a lot better job, and so I would work with somebody like that if they wanted to do it, and but they already have their game, so they're probably not going to do that. But I just think there's reasons that their game's not doing as well as it could.
Yeah, that's very possible. Anyway, shifting back over to Villagers and Heroes, you've got an expansion coming up here really soon.
Yeah, we're doing the Black Thrush. That's the name of a secret sort of thief guild or whatever, and it's a story. It's a storyline. That's what the name's all about. But in addition, we've got more high-level content coming at the highest end, and it's got a lot of content. It's got some big mobile improvements to UI and things like that. And then I think the most exciting feature is probably dungeons, and those are basically timed raids. So they're challenges where players have to complete it within like 30 minutes, but there's different tiers. And what's great about that is it's repeatable content, and it's competitive, and you've got leaderboards and things like that. So we just keep pushing it forward, and I don't know. It's a big game. It's got so many parts to it. There's like the whole story quest side, but then there's more the hardcore raid side that raid kind of players like. So. But
yeah. Well, how much longer do you think Villagers and Heroes has in terms of...
Well, let's see. I think it launched in 2011, so it's already 6 years old, but it keeps getting better, and we keep getting more players, so I'm not really sure. I think mobile is is really giving it life at this point, because on the PC, there's a lot of MMOs, so the market's really crowded. But on mobile, I think I know it's kind of braggy, but I think it's the best mobile MMO right now. I don't think there's anything close at this point. There was a few others that were out there, Crusaders of Light, Celtic Heroes, RuneScape's coming, but I just don't think they're going to hit the mark that we hit. But we haven't gotten the word out very, very much. So because of that, I guess what I'm saying is because we're on mobile now, and I feel like we're at the front of the market, we have a lot of life left. If we were just on the PC, I don't really know how much longer we would be able to sustain it, because it's just so crowded, And it's also fully cross-platform, which is cool. So you can play the exact same characters on any device. So I don't know, years? 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? I don't know. MMOs have long legs. That's the thing.
True enough. I mean, when they're successful, at least.
Yeah, you're right. Good point. What is it? WildStar just went away?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just shut that down, and they gave that thing the collegest of college tries.
Oh
man, yeah.
Final Fantasy XIV nearly died, then came back from the ashes like a phoenix.
And
that's basically a new game.
It's
Yeah.
still using most of 1.0's engine as the thing.
Using it very differently, I guess.
Yeah. Like they've made additions to it, but there's still a lot of 1.0 in there.
That being said, have you ever looked into bringing Villagers and Heroes to consoles? Or rather, would that even be feasible given the engine?
We've talked about it. The only console that would make sense would be Xbox, because one of the guys at Mount Otter used to work at Sony, and he said you don't want to touch the PlayStation; it's way too hard and expensive. So maybe an Xbox version, but I don't know. I just don't think the market's there. Maybe, but we've just seen a pretty good success on mobile, so we're really focused on mobile right now.
Yeah. I guess from my vantage point, if I had to pick a console this thing could possibly soar on, it would be the Nintendo Switch. Just because, it's got that same portability factor that's probably helping the mobile version.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Now you put an idea in my head. I don't know. I mean, I think the biggest challenge would be, are they really strict as gatekeepers?
I couldn't answer that.
The only concern I'd really see with the Switch is with this game being online, there are going to be a lot of points when the Switch won't be because, it's a mobile device without cellular internet.
Well, I think the biggest concern with the Switch is, could it handle the torque engine? Because it being a modern console, it doesn't have that kind of support for it.
Anyways, it might be worth looking into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I haven't looked at the architecture of it, if it's OpenGL or how much RAM they have and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
It should be similar to mobile because it is using NVIDIA's
Tegra X1.
Yeah,
I think?
Tegra.
So,
Huh. I mean, what I like about it is I think the Switch has the same kind of player sensibilities as Villagers and Heroes. Friendly. Not hardcore killer. Which where I could see it might hit the market a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it might be worth looking into.
Yeah.
Anyway, that aside, outside of the big expansion pack, what else is coming to Villagers and Heroes?
Well, I think, let's see. I think that's all I can talk about right now. I'm sorry. We're really focused on this, promoting this expansion right now. We've got a lot of stuff in the pipeline, but we never know for sure when it's going to launch or what's going to launch. But there's going to be more cosmetic options. It excites our players, that's for sure. It doesn't read well. The new players are like, whatever. But these raids, these dungeons that we've added, we're going to really iterate on a lot and just make that feature better and better over time. It's I just think they're really fun. I think they're really fun. So we want to get that kind of competition in the game more.
Right.
I'm a competitive player. I like competing. In some way with other people. I like that in games. And it's sort of like a lightweight esport in a way. I mean, you're competing as a team in times and score against other people. It's not a head-to-head competition, but I like that type of thing. So,
yeah, and outside of Villagers and Heroes, are you working on any other projects?
Nope, this is it. This is our whole focus right now.
Makes sense.
We put all our eggs in one basket. Is that a good business strategy?
We'll find out.
Yeah. We're still trying to find out. It's been 10 years, and we still haven't figured it out yet. But we're still here.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever see that movie? What's it called? Shoot. Never mind, I can't remember it. What was that? Oh, Way of the Gun.
I don't
Way
think
of
I've.
the Gun. There's a really great scene. There's these two young guys, and they're the really great shooters. You know, they're like crooks, right? It's not a western. It's a modern gangster movie or whatever. And they're these really good gun guys. And toward the end of the movie, they need to work a deal out with this old guy, James Caan, right? He's this old guy, and they're like, they don't think much about him, and they're just like, "Who are you, old man?" You know, and he just says, "Well, the only thing you need to know about me is I'm still alive," which is him saying they're young, but he's been doing what they've been doing his entire life, and he never got killed along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I am proud of our team, because we're still here after all these other games went away. You know, I remember when Free Realms came out, and we're like, "Oh shit, it's gonna kill us," you know, because the graphics were really nice and it had some similar kind of product sensibilities that we had, you know.
Right.
So I mean, I don't have anything against Free Realms, but I'm just proud that we survived. We're still here. I mean, it's tough, guys. It is tough. Making games is tough, and there's so much competition.
We're aware. Like, it's like, it's a story that's come up on the program before. I'm like, it's one of the most common stories, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like, in fact, I don't think I've ever gotten a person who's said making games is easy.
Yeah. I mean, it could be easy, but then your game's not going to sell well, you know? I mean, you could do simple little games. Yeah.
Well, these days there would be other reasons why game development be easy, and you know, they're not good reasons. They're you just bought a whole bunch of assets and you literally put that up on Steam.
Yeah, that happens.
Mm-hmm. Like, anyway, I'll see if there are any final questions from my team here.
Right.
I think I'm good.
My curiosity is pretty much satisfied.
I'm good.
All right, then. Well, Damon, it was wonderful having you on the program. It's been a while since we've had an old school interview.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, we've had people who got started, you know, decades ago and all that. It's been a while since we've had one of them. You know, so
it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, anyway, the game is Villagers and Heroes. It's available on Steam. I think it's Windows only. Or is there a Mac and or Linux version?
PC only. Windows only, yes. Windows only, Steam, website, iOS, Android.
All right. Be sure to play it today or tomorrow. You know, it's a free-to-play game, so you know there's no initial investment.
Right, that's true.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Usually this is where we'd go to the next segment, but it's 11:15, so we have run out of time. As far as our topic of discussion, that specific topic will come back in a couple weeks.
Yeah, we have a bigger fish to fry next week.
Yeah, we were going to talk about Animal Crossing, but that doesn't have to be talked about next week.
One of the inspirations for Villagers and Heroes, by the way. Seriously, yeah.
That's surprising. Anyway, the week ahead. So on Friday, we will have a multiplayer session for the game Obliteracy. Like, and yes, that is the actual name of the game. Like, it's a take on literacy and obliteration.
I could have never have guessed.
What a great name.
Well, if you've ever played
so it's about being able to read destruction.
Yeah, you have combat robots, and they destroy each other with the power of words.
Well, this is gonna be bad for me.
Yeah, it's like you might want to have a dictionary nearby. Like, if you've ever played Bookworm Adventures, it's a lot like that in terms of gameplay mechanics.
Well, I'm boned.
As long as it's not like Typing of the Dead.
No. There's no time pressures here. Like, and yeah, coming up on Sunday, we have reviews on Obliteracy. I'm probably going to mispronounce this. Kiratinos Inside the Cube, which is a free-to-play adventure game in the Myst style. Like, more on that on Sunday. And Super Inefficient Golf.
AKA golfing with mines.
Yes.
I mean,
I'm like-
depend how you shoot it. Might actually make it more efficient.
Oh no, you apply the mines to the ball.
Oh.
Yeah.
You don't use a
Oh.
club.
Yeah, it's like there's no golf club. You're using mines and only mines. Like I said last week, it's about as far as the Golf Club 2019 you can get and still be in the same genre. I'm like, sadly, I only got one code for this. So if anyone else wants to indulge in this game, they have to buy it. Also, there is no multiplayer. So no worries about that. It's just about getting the ball into the hole, so to speak. And coming up next week, on September 25th, we should be having, this is a name that's probably going to be mispronouncing. Evgeny Kapstan, I gave it my best shot. Like, it's Russian. From Alawar, we're going to be talking about Beholder 2. Provided everything goes smoothly. First guest from Siberia. Not even.
Yeah, that's the one that's going to be like earlier than usual because
Yeah.
Siberia.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I'll see what I can do about that one.
yeah. And coming up next week, Wednesday, September 26th, we are scheduled to have back on the program James Montagna of Way Forward Technologies. We'll pick up where we left off from our 4th of July interview. Like, that is, if he doesn't have any schedule adjustments to do. He actually hasn't responded to, seeing if he's good for next week. So, it's a bit up in the air next week, but these are the plans. So, until Friday, I shall wish you good gaming.